Okay.
And there you go.
Okay. Now, hello, my name is Theresia Bilola. I am a project manager for a climate services project that is trying to develop a research infrastructure for the African context. I will tell you a bit more about that during the course of this lecture. But here is the outline and how this will go. I will start from how I ended up here. I like to start from there because I want to create a sort of relation with the person who is listening to this lecture or this discussion. And then I will tell you where my starting points are within the climate discussions or how to act for climate. And then we'll look at why we need to get out of the echoing spaces of climate talk, climate policy, climate action. And then I'll tell you a little bit about the work that I am currently doing. And then I don't like to leave climate discussions hanging. So we are going to answer the question that always remains, now what? And then we will have a brief recap. And at the end, I'll give you a short list of the climate related affiliations that I belong to, which I might be helpful or interesting for some of you, and also suggested readings. Now, on every between these slides, you will see slides like this where the heading will be think. And my intention with this, when you listen to this lecture, is that you pause actually and think about what you read on the screen on these slides. So I think this is a big question that most people who work around climate change or who think about climate action are thinking about right now. We have all the science, we have all the knowledge, we have the IPCC reports, we have in some places already the effects of climate change, but climate action is not progressing at the same pace. We see that at different levels. We've seen it at COP, which ended a few weeks ago. Why is the pace different? Knowledge is progressing, but action is barely progressing. Now, I got into climate action probably not the same way that you all are getting into a program officially and studying and choosing to study a particular subject. I got into climate action first by my dissatisfaction with research and trying to make the link between what I was doing as research and how it affects society directly. I wanted something that was tangible. So I started looking for what research will be really tangible. The second thing that drew me to climate action is living in Finland. I saw that in Finland, uh, development and so-called modernization or development and so-called modernization were coexisting with nature. And where I come from, it's usually not like that. When development or buildings and all sorts of construction come in, nature goes out. But here, they are coexisting quite well. You have access to nature no matter where you live. And that was fascinating for me. I wanted to know how this is done. So that's what motivated me. And the other motivation was to see how research plays in society. I was not able to make the link from the research that I did for the PhD, for instance. I was studying strategic planning, but I was wondering how this plays out in society. I liked to be at the intersection between research and society. And I found that in sustainability. And I began to study that and I began to take small actions. I started from just empowering people, starting from myself. I started with what I knew, what kind of misinformation, which has not changed up till now. I began to understand that we as consumers, we are a significant force also in climate action. I went to COP23 as a volunteer, and when I came back, I felt lost. I felt like I didn't have power. I felt like, okay, this is for all the big policymakers, lots of big talk, but what can I as an individual do? So I began to search for what I could do as an individual. And I noticed that we as people, we have a significant role to play in climate action. And then I also noticed that the effects of climate change are not what is given attention easily. Most people don't know what climate change is actually doing. They can't feel it. They can't, quote unquote, touch it. So it's difficult for them to relate to what climate change is, especially in a society like Finland. There's lots of arguments that we can't see it. We are not, it's not, it doesn't have to be our problem because it's not yet here. And then there is a lot of ignorance plus misinformation and misconceptions that are widespread. We also notice that climate-friendly choices are not the first natural choices. So when you go into trying to empower people to take climate action, you have to have all this at the back of your mind before you speak to people or try to empower them. And then last mile communities are very important. It is where the climate effects are clearly seen. One of the reasons that I would propose here at the end is an initiative in the Sahel region in Africa. And that's where you can see the power of last mile communities. They are literally at the point where if they don't take climate action, they will not have where to live in the next few years. Those are the kind of communities that need to be empowered with much more knowledge, but not just getting in there to give knowledge, but also learning from their wisdom. I will talk more about what it means to empower last mile communities. Now, this is another slide that you should pause on and think, like I said in the beginning, with all the knowledge that is around us and in some places the effects of climate change. Why do we still fail to act? What's actually happening in our brains? If you read these slides, you'll find some of the answers why we are not acting. We as humans are prone to immediate gratification. We don't think long term, we think short term. The next thing is that we are loss averse. We don't like to look at life from losses. We like to see optimism, or maybe this is all a lie. If we can't really see it, we can't take action. So that's one thing that you should think about if you go out to empower people, if you think about empowering people to take action for climate or to change their lifestyle to fit climate. I think the biggest issue for climate action is not necessarily now knowing what to do. It is mindset. And to change mindsets, we first have to understand how people think and why they think the way they think. Now, this is a very good illustration that I like to use when I talk about climate, the elephant in the room. Our brains have the emotional part and the rational part. The rational part is what has all the knowledge about climate change. We know the science, we know the connections between our lifestyle and the impacts on the environment. But what pushes the mind to action is the emotional part. So we need to be able to direct the rider, the rational part, with explanations, with reasons, with discourse and effect relationships. But the elephant is what actually does the movement. So we need to motivate this elephant, motivate the emotions and the feelings. People need to feel the change and the emotional connection when you talk about climate action. When you meet people to talk about climate, you need to be able to call out to their emotions for them to be able to act. Then we need to shape the path for the behavior and actions to change. We need to reduce obstacles to climate action by creating an enabling environment. It's not necessary to have this knowledge and then want to act, but you don't know how to start. So when we think climate action, we need to think about how we shape the environment for people to be able to take climate action. When I talk to people about climate, I usually start from what they know, what is the history, and what is the culture, because that is what builds how people react. People listen or gain knowledge, not necessarily for the sake of gaining knowledge. They listen or gain knowledge first by starting from their own viewpoints. They are either gaining the knowledge to support their viewpoints or to find a way to change their viewpoints. So it's important that when we talk about climate, when we talk about how to be climate sensitive, how to take climate action, we think about factors like history and culture. Where is the audience you are trying to reach coming from? What is the culture in relation to what you are talking about? Are you willing to listen to this audience without judgment in order to be able to learn? And also, one important thing in this kind of interaction is that there is always a base knowledge that you can start from. There is no human being who doesn't have some form of knowledge that would help the environment. So you have to start from what this person already knows. What is their socioeconomic and life situation? How can you relate the climate action or the climate knowledge that you are trying to pass? How can you relate it to their socioeconomic and life situation? What are they going to gain from this? What would they lose from this? You need to be able to open their eyes to see, open their minds to see how what you are talking about relates to their socioeconomic and life situation. What are their pain points? What are their closest benefits? And remember to not make assumptions about what people know or do not know about climate, or what people want to do or don't want to do concerning climate action, or concerning preserving the environment that we live in. Go speak to people about climate from a place of wanting to know first where these people are coming from. Now, this is a question that we need to also pause and ponder on. If we achieve the net zero emissions, but we have overlooked human rights, we have failed to safeguard biodiversity, what would that mean for the well-being of people and planet? A lot of the scientists, myself included at the beginning, when I started learning or deepening my knowledge on climate, we tend to fall for the fact that we think that climate action is only about carbon emissions. But for most people, it is more than that. It is food security, it is migration crisis, like in the case of the Sahel region that I mentioned before. It is the prices of goods and services. It is how we consume. It is how society is equal or unequal. It is how much people are able to live on in a day in most societies. So we need to, as scientists or students of climate action, try to move out of this carbon tunnel vision area and know that climate is more than carbon emissions. And for this to happen, there is need to look at sustainability from a broad perspective. We need to be able to look at it in terms of securing broader sustainable development, which means what is the relation between climate action and all these other issues that some of them named on the screen. Now, how do we move beyond? What do I mean by let's move beyond the echoing spaces? A lot of the spaces where climate is discussed is between people who share the same vision about climate, who have probably the same kind of knowledge about climate. So we end up with the same kind of discussions, the same kind of results, and we don't reach the people who are actually supposed to take actions daily. So this diagram that you see on the screen is how we need to change our focus. Who do we need to concentrate on? Not the kindreds, not the ones that are very knowledgeable in climate, who think like us. These people already know what to do and are probably already taking climate action. Our focus should be on people who are probably completely unaware of what to do, completely unaware of how climate change affects their lives, what it means in practical day-to-day life. How do we reach those groups of people? And I know that for scientists, this always looks like it's difficult. How do I break these big things, big uh, jargon, and all the big scientific terms? How do I break this down to people? The starting point is look at the diagram we had from the slide on carbon tunnel vision. How can you relate all the data, all the evidence from science? How can you relate them to those things? And what is happening in people's everyday lives? Why do antagonists behave or think the way they think? What is their life situation? How can you relate that and communicate to them? You can see that all the events and all the things that we do for climate, they are just the tip of the iceberg. There's a big patterns of behavior that I have mentioned before. There's systemic structure and again mindsets that we have barely touched, and that's why it feels like no matter how much talk there is around climate action, it feels like we are not moving. We are not moving as much as we are supposed to move. So the goal is the golden treasure or treasure chest is still below the water. We need to try to touch that to be able to reach the people that we are supposed to actually reach with the knowledge about climate and how to take climate action. Now, this is the work that I currently do. It's a project that is funded by the European Union, and what we are trying to do is to design a climate service research infrastructure, but specifically from the African context. And the interesting thing about this project is that we are starting from what is known. For instance, in Abidjan, we are looking at air quality. We are starting from what the researchers in Abidjan, our partners, have done in terms of air quality. How have they communicated with communities? There is a very interesting example from there that I would like to quote. They found out from researching with the women who smoke and sell fish that there are different effects to their health from burning different kinds of wood for smoking fish. And when you start from that kind of very low threshold point, you are able to relate to the women. So they are doing a longitudinal study to see what are the health effects that are related to these women burning different kinds of wood. Then they will be able to easily communicate to these women how the effects of what they are doing, first on their health and then on the air that they breathe. So that's just one example. But the goal is to be able to find these kind of climate actions and bring them together in a sort of quote unquote Africa-centric research infrastructure. But now what? Now after all this talk about there's an elephant in the room, there is an iceberg that we haven't even touched, you're probably asking yourself, now what do I do? I think the first thing that you can do, especially if you are thinking about empowering people and communities, is start by debunking common myths. One myth that I have answered a lot of questions for is, you know, that how cold it has been in Finland for the past few days. And some of my friends turn to me and ask me, you're talking about climate change, so what is happening now? Why is it so cold in Finland? And then I had to explain to them that climate change is not global warming. Climate change also means extreme weather events. It could be extremely cold and it could be extremely warm. And these weather events will not be as consistent as we have known them. Can you see this kind of changes? And then you find that they're not they're not, because now they can relate to what I am trying to say. But if I had approached that question of how can you say that, why is it cold? Why does this person think like this? I wouldn't have been able to explain to them that climate change is not about global warming. But when you explain to them, starting from the point their level of knowledge or what they know, then it's easy for them to understand. The second thing that is still highly underlooked is indigenous knowledge and citizen science. And science, how do we bring all of this together? There is still this tendency to classify knowledge, some knowledge as knowledge and some not as knowledge, in the sense of, okay, this is knowledge and we can use it. But most of the solutions for climate action lie in indigenous knowledge and citizen science. In most cases, people have developed ways to cope with the environment, to protect the environment, to live in harmony with the environment. And we as scientists coming in with our data and all our knowledge, we need to start from knowing what these people have been doing for generations to be in harmony with the environment, to protect the environment. That is still something that has gaps. So as students of climate, as students of environment, this is something that you should look at maybe in your future research, maybe as your end of studies papers, or maybe in your future business idea. How do you bring science and citizen science together? Start from what people already know. As I mentioned before, we tend to seek out information, not for the sake of gaining knowledge for its own sake, but to support what we already know. So try to support start from what people already know. There are lots of solutions in terms of climate services that are needed, even in Finland and also out of Finland, to support decision making and making climate information actually useful, usable, and used. A lot of the climate information that is out there, people can see it, people can read it, but they don't know what to do with it. How do you transform this information into what can be used to actually make decisions on a daily basis? How do you empower people with this data and information in a way that they can actually use it? Now, these are the important points from what I have been talking about. People and last mile communities need to be empowered to act. We need to be empowered. People need to be empowered to act, because the responsibility does not only lie with governments and big multinational companies. There's a role of people to send a message to these stakeholders that this is where our pain points are, and you need to take action on this. As consumers, we can send the message to the companies by choosing those that are climate friendly or climate sensitive. As investors or small investors, we can we can send a message to business people, we can send a message by how we consume. You also need to remember that we are not wired to think long-term. Instant gratification is easier. So when you approach climate action, remember that this is just the way the human thinks. You have to find a way to call out to their emotional brain, and you have to break down the goal of climate action into smaller pieces. What would I gain in a day by taking climate action? What would I gain in a week? What would I lose in a day? What would I lose in a week? And so on and so forth. People don't understand 4 to 5 years to 10 years predictions. We need to be able to break them down into smaller pieces. Also remember that climate is more than carbon emissions. Don't ignore the emotional brain, but remember that context and culture are important too. Step out of the echoing spaces. Step out of your bubbles, both physically and also knowledge-wise. Think about the kind of knowledge that you are trying to gain. How can you step out of the comfort zone in those areas? What kind of climate knowledge do you have? Do you have the knowledge that everyone should have a baseline of what they do to hurt the environment or what they do to preserve the environment? Are you living in that bubble that everyone should know? You should know this. That's just the way it should be. You need to step out of that bubble to know that people are from different cultures and different backgrounds, and that influences how much knowledge they have about climate actions. The solutions to climate change are not a one-person thing. It will need co-creation and collaboration between disciplines, sectors, and knowledge bases. So in your trying to find solutions through your business ideas, through your research, remember that it wouldn't take one person, it wouldn't take one discipline, it wouldn't take one sector, and it wouldn't take one type of knowledge to find the solutions to the effects of climate change. Citizen science has to complement what we call quote unquote expert science. Start from what you know, start from what the audience that you are addressing knows. Now, these are some of the references that would be useful for you or that I have made reference to. This first one is one of my favorites because it gives you climate action that you can take starting from your couch, and you can choose which level to start from. There's level 1, 2, 3, and I think 4. So you can start from the very lazy action. And this also can be used to communicate to people about climate action, especially if you are meeting a group of people that you are not sure about what is their level of knowledge about climate action. This is a very good place to start. I have used it several times, especially when I talk to just friends or a group of people whom I'm not sure about what is their take on climate action. And then, of course, there is the Turku project on 1.5 degree lifestyle, which is quite interesting. And that is good because it's Finnish context oriented. So you'll be able to easily relate to that if you live in Finland. And there is the climate reality project that has a lot of information about what to do, especially for last mile communities that are already facing the effects of climate change. And then there is this Great Green Wall initiative that I talked about. The idea of this project is to build basically a wall of trees along the Sahel region to stop desertification, because those communities are basically facing a situation where the desert weather is spreading towards where people live. And if they don't plant this wall of trees in time, most people will lose their homes. And it's important not just for that region, it's important for also different regions, because if those places lose homes for people, the migration crisis that we have is going to increase, because those people will not have where to stay, and then they will start moving. There is also food security, which is an issue because of that. But this is an ongoing project, and they are nowhere near finished. But if you follow that project or watch the documentary that has been made recently about the project, it will give you a lot of perspective about how climate change is not just about carbon emissions and how it can connect regions that are nowhere near each other, and how it can affect lives which are not necessarily at the point where the effects of climate change are. And then there is this article, Closing the Knowledge Action Gap in Climate Change, that I quoted here, that will be interesting to read. And lastly, our project website is here also if you want to know more about the project that I spoke about. And what has been very important for me in the climate work or climate action is to be able to volunteer and give my time in some of these affiliations that you see here. And it's pretty easy to be part of any of these. There's the UN Volunteers, there's the African Climate Foundation, there is the African Circular Economy Network, there is Climate Resilience Salons, which is mostly geared at women and small initiatives and how women play a role in climate action. Then there is Think Africa, which is based in Finland. Think Africa is not necessarily focused just on climate, but it has to deal with relations between the African diaspora in Finland and also relations between Finland and Africa. And within Think Africa, there is a sustainability team. And there, what I do there is I do this sort of low threshold empowerment or informing people about what is climate action and what you can do on a daily basis. How can you change your lifestyle in a way that it becomes climate sensitive? And then we also run small seminars to communities in Africa about climate action topics. And then there is a Safer Climate Initiative, which is mostly dealing with climate and civil society organizations. What is the role of the civil society in climate action, and especially in policy making and policy discussions in Finland? So these are the affiliations, and if you're interested, you can look out for this. I hope that I have not confused you more, that I've been able to, quote unquote, empower you a little bit to move out of the bubble of studying climate for the sake of the data and the figures, but getting out of that echoing space and talking to people who are completely on the other side. I hope that this has empowered you. Thank you so much for your time, and reach out if you find some points of convergence with this discussion that I have just had here, or you have some questions that you want me to answer. I would gladly answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Theresia.